Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today it gives me great pleasure to welcome Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma back to our hangout. Pandit ji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Namaskar, Sri Iyer ji. It's a pleasure to be here. And may I just offer yourself and all of the audience best wishes on this incredible Raksha Bandhan. I'm sitting here in the United Kingdom and there's a full moon bathing us in its surreal radiance. And I hope everybody has had the blessings of their sisters. As you can see, I have just rushed over from engaging in a wonderful celebration of Raksha Bandhan. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, indeed. And thank you and wish you the same, sir. Now, it's been a month and a half since we talked about, the events transpiring in the United Kingdom. And one of the things that we've been watching closely is what's been happening in the Labour Party, especially with its chairman, Kier Starmer. So what can you update our viewers with, sir?
Well, there's never a dull moment. As I think we mentioned when we last spoke, the Labour Party is going through a period of reflection, of swadhyaya, as the yogis talk about. And I think it's it's already started to generate good results. And we desperately need it too. Kier Starmer, I've always felt, being a person of legal background, I've always felt he would bring the party back into established legal parameters and legal standards as well. And that seems to be happening, which is a wonderful development. I think that the forces guiding the Labour Party have recognized that not only did they alienate the minority community, such as our own Indian Hindu community, but they also alienated their core seats in the north. They became so attached to blind dogmatic positions that they actually completely disconnected from the worries of the average person on the street. Now, their traditional seats, the heartland, the red wall that used to go right across the landscape of England, many of those councils, the vast majority, have been staunch Labour strongholds, and they're also Labour MPs and Labour councillors. Now, if you make a list of the power little groupings across the north, you will notice two things. One, you will notice that the Labour councils and where Labour MPs are resident are also the same communities where these grooming gang cases have been absolutely devastating for the local community. And the white British population living in those areas has lost faith with the Labour Party on that score. When your daughters are being traumatized and abused to such a degree, and parliamentarians are talking about self-determination for Kashmir, it's not unnatural for the people to think, well, hang on a minute, our interests are not being looked after. This is not the way in which a representative democracy looks after its constituents and its citizens. And so that was a huge factor as well. And Kier Starmer, I'm certain, has recognized that, and his advisors also. But there are other good signs coming out.
I was just going to ask you, perhaps you would like to share some of the good trends that you're seeing coming out from the Labour Party's thinking.
Okay, well, much of what I'm going to share with you is based on inference. Remember, we have seen a climate where almost every week, one Labour parliamentarian or another was making an utterance about Kashmir, amplifying beyond reality the devastation of having an internet blackout. Okay, amplifying beyond the facts atrocities perpetrated allegedly by Indian armed personnel against a poor domestic Kashmiri community. All of those statements seem to have dried up. We have had a period of lull, and it's noticeable by the absence that something has shifted. And I'm beginning to see a design coming out here. There are a couple of other things I noticed. Do you remember when we last spoke? We had, I think you mentioned last time, that Debbie Abrahams had been bounced out of India.
Yes, indeed. We talked about that at length in one of our previous hangouts. Please go ahead, sir.
That's right. We did a little bit of research, so we'll scratch under the surface and see what's going on with Debbie Abrahams and indeed the pro-Pakistani lobby. And very, very interesting results have come out. If I can share with your viewers, in the United Kingdom, we have this mechanism in Parliament called the APPG, which is the All-Party Parliamentary Group. And parliamentarians can form a parliamentary group on anything from yoga, fox hunting, preservation of hedgehogs, or indeed Kashmir. And there is an all-party parliamentary group on Kashmir. Now, an APPG is, as it says, all-party. And so what you have is parliamentarians from right across the whole spectrum. And traditionally, an APPG had one purpose, and that was to enable information to be gathered for the use of the parliamentarians. So if they've identified an issue, an APPG is formed, a secretariat is installed, and then the secretariat does research, produces policy papers, notes, and so on, and briefings. So there is one on Kashmir, and it's actually been incredibly vocal for a long period of time. So much so that many people have felt that it's actually the voice within Parliament of the Pakistani government. And we have watched its activities with interest, but it's been silent. Now, since the election, we thought, have there been any changes in the APPG? So we've done a little bit of research, and some interesting things have emerged. For example, I know that there was an AGM of the APPG not so long ago, just a matter of a few weeks ago, at which 70 parliamentarians attended. And yet, I understand that of the 70 who attended and who pledged to join the APPG, I know of 30 who have withdrawn their pledges and who are no longer members of the APPG. So there seems to be a bit of an exodus, and a little bit of research has drawn to our attention that the APPG has potentially become a toxic group. And I mentioned Debbie Abrahams because I think she is probably the catalyst for this transformation.
Are you going to share the smoking gun with us?
A smoking gun. Well, I'm going to. I've just dug up. In my research, we produced a document, which I think is quite interesting, and thank you. I will share it. So this is from the parliamentary records. And in Parliament, they have a register of all of these APPGs. So this is the register of the APPG on Kashmir. Now, if you have a look at the purpose, you will notice a key phrase there, self-determination. Okay, so this is not an impartial purpose. This is a purpose which says that we actually want to achieve what the Pakistani government has been proposing for a long period of time. This does not say that we want the issue to be resolved between Pakistan and India. This doesn't say that the United Nations Resolution 47 should be implemented or anything along those lines. This is clearly a partisan position. And this position is to support self-determination. Now, that self-determination phrase is such an important phrase when considering this issue. You'll recall, I'm sure that you'll remember we had those outrageous speeches at the Labour Party conference, where they made all sorts of horrific allegations, and they also passed a resolution for self-determination. And I hope that your viewers will also recall that when Kier Starmer came, the information that we received and that he confirmed, and which is now the official party position on the Labour Party website, is that self-determination has disappeared. There is no statement of self-determination as policy. So that is a distinct shift. And we thought, well, it would be nice to know a little bit more about this APPG. And so we uncovered a few more interesting little snippets. And one of the things that we uncovered is here in the benefits in kind. So parliamentarians are required to declare the sources of any funding which they receive, especially in the APPGs. And your viewers will see here that the government of Pakistan actually contributed over £30,000 to facilitate a trip to Pakistan and to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Now, this is toxic. I'm sure you recall globally how much trouble the mention of Russian interference in American political processes. You know, this is harmful to democracy. And the allegations here in the United Kingdom have been flying that Russia and China have had influences on the parliamentary democratic processes. Now, this is a clear statement that the Pakistani government has been funding an APPG within parliament to achieve its own objectives. Now, this is not to inform parliamentarians. This is actually to mold their opinion to be in alignment with Pakistan.
So a couple of things stand out from this document that you just shared, Satish ji. One is the fact that the trip was funded by the government of Pakistan. Perhaps the Indian government knew that, and that is why they refused her visa, at least entry into India. There's a technicality there that she actually had the visa, but it was not honored, or she had already been notified that she cannot come into the country, even though you had a visa. The Indian government is well within its authority to do that kind of stuff. Like today, I cannot visit India because there is a ban on all visas. Until they lift the ban for COVID purposes, nobody can travel. Those visas don't mean anything. So that was the first thing, sir. So this was essentially a Pak-funded trip. Perhaps the Indian government knew, which is why they said, this lady is really stretching her luck here. And she's thinking that why not go there also, right? I mean, that's one. The other thing is, if I go back and look at your page 1, I also saw the name of Mr. Tanmanjit Singh Desi.
Yes, I spotted that also.
Yeah. So he has been receiving the red carpet treatment in India. The last trip, he was all written up. I mean, if he is still a part of this group of whatever is remaining from 70, I think a lot of questions are going to be asked. At least eyebrows will be raised. And what do you make of it, sir? Actually, it is important to you because he represents your constituency.
He is my member of parliament. Not that I think he is aware of that. But no, you're absolutely right. And just to refresh and to clarify what you have just said, on the basis of Debbie Abrahams, an individual parliamentarian, making comments, remarks, and pressing for a policy that was counter to the interests of India, she was denied entry. Now, here we have a parliamentary group of many more MPs, all actually aligned with exactly the same political position as Debbie Abrahams had. And for the life of me, I can't understand why Tanmanjit wouldn't also be denied entry into India on exactly the same grounds. His membership of this APPG, which is funded by the government of Pakistan, and whose purpose is self-determination of Kashmiri residents, is totally anti the whole of Indian policy on this issue. And so there should be equality between the two of them. And so I wouldn't be at all surprised if the APPG in its entirety was denied entry to India. India would be within its rights to do so. Remember, we have recently had a conflict on the Pakistani border. We lost some more soldiers only last week. So there is a state which is involved in inflicting harm on Indian citizens. And that state is supported by these groups. And this group is funded by that state. And so there is a completely rational argument to be put forward to actually ban all members of this particular APPG. There is another dimension to this, and that is one of conflict of interest. Now, we very clearly, everybody understands what conflict of interest is, that if you have a perspective which it makes you dependent in some way or shape or form on a third party, then really you should not be in a position to contribute to decision making concerning that third party. It's very straightforward. I mean, if a judge is involved in a case and one of his family members or her family members is involved in that case, the judge recuses themselves. So what the judge does is say, I have a conflict of interest. Here we have an APPG, a list of MPs. The APPG has received funds from Pakistan. There should be absolutely no question that this is now a conflict of interest, and they should not be involved in any decision-making process. So this is another depth that's being plumbed. Now, the dates are dates that I'm going to check a little bit more, but I have a suspicion that the details on this register, which was only published in July, I think the details on this register became public knowledge after Debbie Abrahams had actually been excluded. Now, an interesting little exercise we're going to engage in is to try and seek clarity on past funding. Because as the chair of the APPG, she has clearly made a decision to make sure that this funding is declared. And I wouldn't be surprised if part of that decision is because of the increased scrutiny, shall we say, on the functioning of this particular group. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in Kier Starmer's office had said, okay, go through this APPG group. We want to understand what's going on here. And lo and behold, we encounter a massive cash injection coming into that group. So these things are all coming together. And I think the public is being made aware of them on a pretty much a daily basis. This will be a problem. Silence is something I mentioned, that on the front benches, we're getting hardly any noise coming out. Naz Shah, Afzal Khan, and people of that ilk who have been very vocal, they too have stopped making remarks. And so that too is indicative to me that Kier Starmer is putting his house in order. And we shall see, we shall be watching with very much a high state of interest in the evolution of this APPG over the next few weeks. And as I say, if we encounter anything in our investigations, we shall share it with you. But yes, I think that we're seeing Kier Starmer shake all of this up and starting to bring some sort of sense and reason in the way the Parliamentary Labour Party functions.
That is a welcome sign, because as we always talked about it, we need two healthy functioning parties to have a strong democratic system. Satish ji, when I saw this document that you just shared with us, I'm reminded of a Telugu phrase, and I'll translate it in English after that. In Telugu, it reads, Minga metuku ledu, misalaku sampangi nune. What it means is, this is looking from Pakistan's point of view. They do not have a grain of rice to eat, but they want to apply scented oil to their mustache.
Very good. The Telugu people have a very poetic way of putting things into words, don't they? But precisely, I mean, £30,000 for one MP to go and visit a remote part of Pakistan. And on the other hand, as you say, the economy is in complete and utter, it's a shambles. It is in self-destruct mode. It is a disappointing development, but we're very happy to have discovered this. Just on the subject of discoveries, when we were ferreting around and trying to understand what was going on with the Labour Party, an interesting little note came across my desk, and that was that Debbie Abrahams has had a personal assistant, a member of the Secretariat, for the best part of 11 years, a Labour councillor, a young lady, Harpreet Gill, I think her name was. And she's been supporting Debbie Abrahams for 11 years. After this debacle about this payment from the government of Pakistan, we noticed that she is no longer employed. And Debbie Abrahams is now seeking a new assistant. So there is a possibility that heads had to roll, and some poor innocent person further down the chain is no longer now in employment. After 11 years, it seems to be a strange development. But who knows? I'm sure it'll come out in the wash.
You know, this thing is not going to stop. Poor, secretary who was working for 11 years. That's like you're trying to make a scapegoat out of her. But let me ask you a different question. She's from the Oldham constituency, isn't she? Debbie Abraham.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
What was her margin of victory in the 2019 elections?
Well, it's again a very interesting question and a very perceptive question. So if I recall, Oldham, the majority that she had was not that great. It was in the region of about 1,400 or something like that. Just over 1,000 was the majority. Now, we're aware that there are probably some 426 Hindu families in that particular constituency. But in addition to that, Oldham is one of those towns which has really suffered as a result of Pakistani grooming gangs. And so the Labour control in that area is not nearly as firm as I think they have enjoyed in the past. If I was in Debbie Abraham's shoes, I would be really looking to my laurels to see what I could do to shore this up. Perhaps it will encourage her and propel her to spend less time in Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and more time in Oldham, trying to address the serious concerns of her own constituents. So yes, it's a very thin majority she holds.
Sarji, what you're not saying, and which I'm compelled to say, is what you're not saying. Put your house in order.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And why not? I mean, we are a representative democracy. People pay taxes in order to be represented. And you're in America, the America which termed the phrase no taxation without representation.
Right.
You know, that was the clarion call which massed the American population together to throw the British out of America. It's such a severe idea. And in Debbie Abrahams's constituency, it's evident that there are people who are feeling that they have no representation, that their views, their needs are not being looked after, they're being neglected. And it is a complete nonsense that a person in that constituency would be traipsing around in the foothills of the Himalayas.
Satishji, I want to change the topic just a little bit, if you will. The last time we talked about, in Leicester Square, there were talks about bringing down Mahatma Gandhi's statue. The BLM has taken a life of its own. It seems to have gone from BLM to something else to something else. What is it that people, British Hindus, British Indians, how are they seeing this thing? And is there any impact on their lives because of this?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent and relevant and timely concern. We have seen only yesterday a march in London in which members of the Black Lives Matter movement, not necessarily the formal movement, not necessarily the organizational movement, but certainly sympathizing with and running parallel to those. And in this movement, this march that was held, there were men dressed in paramilitary clothing. They were dressed like an alternative police force. They even had the word police on their attire. Now, this is strictly illegal. There is a law which prohibits a person from dressing in a manner which is associated with the police. And yet nobody intervened and nobody stopped it. And so it is still very much alive. It is still very much a very real problem, an issue that has to be addressed. And I don't think it's going to go away. But having said that, as far as our community is concerned, I don't think there is any question that we sympathize and that we fully resonate with the issue at the heart of this, and that is white supremacy and discrimination against people of color. I think, however, though, that the contribution that our community can make to this is unique, and we are not doing it. Our contribution, we as Hindus, we are civilization builders. We always look to fit in to wherever we can in order to build a society which is good for all of us. And we are known as being civilization builders. We don't burn civilizations, we build. Whatever weaknesses there are, we try and shore them up and help everybody move forward. And so our response really is a very unique and special response to this, but it's not being heard. In that march that I've just mentioned, I noted a number of Sikh lads there who were also dressed in paramilitary clothing. And it's quite easy to become inflamed by the atrocities that have been inflicted by white supremacists over the last century, 2 centuries. It's very easy to get carried away, and young people do get carried away. But our contribution really should be to find a way in which we can help this issue to move forward. You see, it's a fact. White people here in Britain, the average Brit on the street is not racist. It's also a fact that the institutions of this country were established during colonial rule, and the institutions are very much colonialist. They still have an opinion of themselves which does not reflect the reality in today's world. And the manner in which they conduct, the manner in which they speak, the manner in which their guidelines are constructed, there are so many things that are offensively colonialist, but that's institutional. The third complication is that the majority of the British public have no idea of what the colonialist history really was. And so they feel that their pride in their nation is being attacked unjustifiably. And so we see a natural division occurring, an innocent white population who don't know what their history is, an innocent but aggrieved and rightfully aggrieved black population who do know what their history is and who are saying, we will take this no further, and an administration which is actually sitting back and allowing a lot more heat to develop. Now, into this toxic mix, into this volatile mix, we have a huge amount to contribute. Our experience of colonialism is unmatched. First, we were colonized by Saudi Arabia. In essence, if you think about it, Pakistanis, they study the Quran in Arabic. So that is an Arabic colonization. It's the replacement of the indigenous civilization with an alien civilization. So first we were colonized by the Saudi Arabians, and then we were colonized by the British. So we know what colonization is. And we see how colonization harms everybody who comes into contact with it. Our voice in this is unique. This thing about statues, if I can use that as an example, I'm against tearing down statues because I think the opportunity of flipping the situation is so wonderful. If you have a statue of a racist, and in the past it has been applauded and people have looked up to him, such as Winston Churchill, if you can then tell everybody the reality of what Winston Churchill did to India, you create an environment when the British themselves know who it was that they're dealing with. And wouldn't you feel shame? Wouldn't you then, as a population, think, we have to sort this out? It's not right for us to be celebrating. If it's not this generation, the next generation would then learn from that statue. So we should make them into memorials so that everybody, every day, every minute, every second, whoever is walking past is reminded of colonialism and the true cost of colonialism. Now that would be a typically Hindu sort of a contribution to this space. And somehow or other, we have to find an avenue of getting our voice into this conversation. I think that time's coming. And we're noticing already that there is a great deal of heat being generated and a rejection where originally there was compassion for the Black Lives Movement. Now there is resentment in the domestic white community who are saying, we're not racist. Stop telling us that we're racist, because actually we're not. The issue is that they don't know about the racism and the white supremacy in the institutions. That's got to be the target. And you'll be seeing some more videos and writings where I'm actually trying to get that message across. That would be a good contribution to make, and that would be typically Sanatani.
Thank you for that, Satish ji. In fact, I'm reminded of an anecdote. I think Prince Charles was on a visit to India, and he was being shown, every city in India has a club, like the Chennai Club, or it's called Madras Club, if I remember correctly,
Sure.
Bangalore Club, the Bombay Club, and Delhi Club, and so on and so forth.
You mustn't forget the Kolkata Club.
Kolkata Club. In one of these clubs, and I don't remember which one, there is a plaque that says Winston Churchill owes so much money, and he didn't pay for it. And then Prince Charles reaches out and says, can I pay for it now? He said, no, we want the world to know that this man did not pay his dues.
Yeah. And that's the way to deal with these issues, because ultimately we have to educate people.
Yes.
And the presence of these statues is phenomenal. It's such a good opportunity to educate so many people. Whereas if you remove them, what you're doing is you are removing the records of the atrocities of some very unpleasant people. And if you do that, the likelihood of those atrocities reoccurring is dramatically increased. So I would suggest that we have a different approach to tearing down statues. Let's use them.
Today I'm on a quotation spree. The Americans have a phrase for this: out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
So Satish ji, today's conversation was absolutely, cracker. And we now know that Pakistan has done things. Perhaps, the APPG can say, well, this is not illegal, but questions are being asked. It is definitely not ethical that you take the money from a government, and this is your own parliamentary group, and it just doesn't have a good smell about it, doesn't pass the smell test. So viewers, for us to continue to give you this kind of quality Hangouts. We request you to subscribe, refer our site to your friends. We see that about only 1 in 2 of you are subscribers to our content. We need to grow. We need to grow bigger, because then we can bring even more quality programming. Sometimes we slip up. I'm the first one to admit. And we would like to bring in more quality programming. And for that, we need just your subscription. We're not asking you to donate. If you can donate, that's great, but it's not a must. But please, please subscribe to our channel. And Satish ji, you are a wonderful guest. As always, thank you very much. Happy Raksha Bandhan to you. Namaskar. And we'll be back soon with more such interesting conversations.
Sriji, thank you very much for allowing me to get some messages across and to help to educate our Hindu community here in the UK and elsewhere as to what's going on. I think it's such a valuable contribution to make. And I can't help but to reiterate what you just said. Everybody needs to do something. If people who are watching this are benefiting from it, then in our tradition, we give some sort of contribution to support the people whose efforts make this happen. And you're not really asking for a huge contribution. What you're asking for is at the least the effort involved in subscribing and getting you to that 100,000. So please, anybody who is watching, please do show your appreciation for Sriji's work and subscribe. Ring that little bell, I think, is what all the youngsters these days say. But
Yes.
please do everything that's possible to make PGurus a much, much more powerful and more influential voice in the Hindu space. It's desperately needed. So Sriji, thank you so much and have a wonderful and pleasant evening. Om Pranam.
Namaskar. Namaskar.